I'm at Kanwit from the University of Pittsburgh, and I'm here to talk to you about an article that will be appearing in Foreign Language Annals in June 2018 that I wrote with a couple of my collaborators from Indiana University, Vanessa, Elias, and Rebecca Clay. And the journal has asked us to provide a relatively brief and non-technical overview of the article so that a wider audience might gain information about our work, and if you're interested in more of the technical details, that you might check out the article itself in print. We know that a major portion of language acquisition involves being able to use not just a variety of different forms, but using those forms in appropriate contexts. So perhaps based on what else is present in the sentence, or what are known as independent linguistic variables, or based on social variables. So perhaps if you've been immersed in a particular setting previously where one form is more popular than another, you might show preference for that form. In other words, if you've studied abroad somewhere where that form is more popular, being a social factor here. Research has shown that learners can develop more nuanced grammars that reflect what environment they've been immersed in, which is precisely what I was just noting. So we wondered whether learners who studied in a region where one intensifier is more popular than another would show this same preference after studying abroad. And by intensifier, in this case I mean an adverb that intensifies or makes greater the meaning or the semantics of the adjective that it's modifying. So something like bien contento versus muy contento in Spanish, so very happy versus really happy, something like that in English as the translational equivalent. So in order to answer these questions, we designed a contextualized preference task that tells a story, and we manipulated a number of linguistic factors that are shown to affect which intensifier is preferred. We looked at learners who spent a total of 6 weeks in either Oviedo, Spain, or Mérida, Mexico, and they completed this task at the beginning and at the end of their stay abroad. And local native speakers also participated, and these were members of these students' host families, so they were the individuals who were providing this input or language while the learners were abroad. So getting to our results, what did we find? Well, learners did not begin with significant differences in their response at the first task time. But the learners in Mérida did select bien significantly more than the learners in Oviedo, Spain after the stay abroad, which matched the local native speaker preferences. We found that one of those variables that we manipulated, adjective quality, significantly affected the responses for all 4 of our participant groups. And in each case, when there was a variably positive adjective, which is an adjective that's positive in some contexts but not all, that those contexts most strongly favored bien. So participants were more likely to select bien with variably positive adjectives. So an example of that would be something like grande, which could be good or bad depending big, which could be good or bad depending upon its context. So something like un sueldo bien grande, a very big salary, would be variably positive, right? Whereas something like un problema muy grande would be a very big problem, would be variably negative. So with variably negative adjectives, we see the opposite effect, so that muy is favored rather than bien. We also found that individual learners matched the overall trend of the groups. So for example, in Mérida, each individual participant was 2 times more likely to increase selection of bien after the stay abroad than the participants in Oviedo. We also looked at individual items, doing an analysis of those, and found that for more than half of the 24 items, we found additional evidence of participants becoming more like local native speakers. So for 14 of the 24 and 16 of the 24 items, we see rates that move towards what the native speakers did for those items at time 2 for both of our learner groups. And in some cases, this meant differential pattern in the 2 sites. So in one site where muy would go up for that item, that was towards what the native speakers did, and in the other site it meant decreasing muy and increasing bien. But we found other items where in both cases learners needed to increase selection of muy, for example, toward the native speaker rate. So different patterns there. So overall we found that our data did confirm that learners are able to greater approximate different local targets after a stay abroad, although in some cases they overshoot these targets, so they overgeneralize what's going on. Certain linguistic variables that aren't as important to native speakers, that I'm not really focusing on in this brief summary, become more important to the learners than they do to native speakers, or within factors that do matter to native speakers, we see learners behaving a bit more categorically or at higher rates than native speakers would. And this could be due to a number of reasons, comparing our study to others that maybe have found more robust differences after a stay abroad. One would be relative frequency. So how often BN is selected compared to MUI in our data. BN was relatively low in our data. It was less than 10% selection for both of our native speaker groups, whereas other studies of acquisition abroad have looked at two forms that are closer to a 60-40 split than ours was, for example. There are also differences could be related to formality. So Mercedes Celano has found that BN is considered less formal than MUI in Venezuela, and this is true for a number of dialects as well. So if a form like BN is less formal, learners may get less access to it when they're abroad. It's not as likely to be present in classroom discourse, for example, or if host members are trying to speak more formally to give their host students practice before they go to class, things like that, BN would be less likely to appear. And finally, a third reason why they might be getting less BN when they're abroad is the form as an intensifier tends to be absent in textbooks. So whereas other studies have looked at, say, two different ways of expressing the future or the past that are both found in grammar texts, you're not likely to see BN as an intensifier in textbooks. So another reason why learners may take a little longer to get there. Thank you. If you're interested in further information about the study, please do check it out in Foreign Language Annals.